This,
tell us about
well,
water, tell us about nature rights.
it's such a joy to be with you all this morning. And Cynthia, thank you. I'm such a big fan of your work and great to see my friend Ken. Definitely, it's great to be with all of you. I feel very privileged right now to be speaking to people who are already practitioners and young in the beginning of their, in their path. Many of you, some of you probably see yourselves as long term. Now, the thing that I'll start with is just, what awakened me and what helped shape some of my worldviews. Um, and then we'll go to a little bit of a journey about the rainforest in general, which I know you are also in the rainforest, and also, get back into the Amazon and talk about, what has been a amazing process that I've been getting to be a part of these last 6 or 7 years. And then, I'll be open to your questions of what would be helpful. Just starting from my own journey, when I was my first week or so in college, university, I was given a pamphlet about the Gaia hypothesis that James Lovelock had written. And this Gaia hypothesis was basically something that was new at the moment, but also resonates a lot with indigenous wisdom, which is that the earth is a living system, that we're embedded in a kind of an alive um, system named after the Greek goddess for the earth, a live being, in the way that it is. The planet was basically conscious in a way, able to react to conditions that would be conducive to life flourishing, and keep those conditions virtually stable for billions of years. And so, this was a aha moment for me to realize that the earth is a living system, and no matter where we are from or what part of the earth we're born, we're literally cells in the body of a living earth. And that is kind of a consciousness that I think catapulted my activism to realize, wow, the earth is alive and life is sacred. And it's so important. It's so rare that there's life on a planet in space. And we are basically a miracle. And that we are also embedded in a conscious being that we can have a relationship with. And that kind of began my activism. I also started hearing about the rainforest, the Amazon rainforest, and something went off in my heart, like some kind of a connection, like I tuned into the radio dial. If I'm a cell in the body of a living earth, I'd then tune into a radio dial, the frequency of the forest, and I could hear and feel connected to that place. And that's when I had as many dreams, actually, so series of dreams, and that sometimes repeated for about 6 or 7 years before I ever went to the rainforest. But those dreams, I believe, were my ability to connect, have a relationship with Gaia, and receive this deep call from Gaia about the rainforest. And so I eventually went down there 33 years ago and fell in love with the rainforest and began to devote my life to protecting her. And one of the things that I'm just very honored and conscious about is that in especially the work that we're doing around the tropical rainforest, it would be no tropical rainforest if indigenous peoples were not in deep relationship with it, with the forest. And so I've learned a lot from indigenous peoples who actually have done a great job of protecting large tracts of the rainforest. And it's only through, this conflict with the global economic system where they are being basically taken from their land, and also their territories are being destroyed. Now let's zoom out a little bit and say, tropical rainforests, if we were to be out in space looking at Earth, we'd see a green belt around the equator all around the planet. That would be the tropical rainforest. And most of life occurs there. Most of biological productivity, like forests, like mangroves and wetlands, and the tropics are so rich. Most of the species on Earth are found there. And also that's where there's home to most of the Earth's cultural diversity, indigenous languages, indigenous peoples, and communities. And so it's where life is teeming. And the largest and historically, we've lost about 50% of the tropical rainforest. From a biosphere perspective, from looking at the Earth as this living entity, that's like a super organism, the tropical rainforests are like the vital organs. They are the places where oxygen and water are flowing, and carbon being sequestered, weather is being regulated, rain is being generated and circulated. That is the would say both the lungs and the heart of the biosphere. Anyway, so it's connecting with that place and seeing the Earth from as a system. We realize how just it is as if we have decided if the Earth was a conscious being, it's almost like humans have basically forgotten that they're embedded in a host, that they have a host. They're part of a living, breathing entity, in which case that does one thing very well. It cooperates in communities of life to regenerate and perpetuate life. So nature basically is a system of life, a system that's interwoven, and humans are a part of that weave. It's just that some people have forgotten, and our economic system has forgotten that there is, this life flourishing on the planet, that ultimately the main purpose of all this is to perpetuate more life, to be able to maintain conditions conducive for more life to flourish. That's what life has done on this planet. And that's kind of our prime directive. It's kind of like what we're, as all creatures are, should be connected to the life force. And so, it's a very, as much can be scientific as it can be, cultural and relational. This idea that we are organisms, and we members of the ones who could learn from other systems, systems cooperating to be conducive to life. Well, I lost you guys. Are you still there?
We're here. We're still here now.
Okay. Okay, cool. I just lost the video. I just see Sabah roadmap now, but I'll keep going. Seems like maybe someone turned off the video of you all. Oh, there you are.
Our internet is a little patchy.
Oh, wait. Okay. So basically looking at the tropical rainforest, the Earth has already lost half of the tropical rainforest. And when we think about the role they play in maintaining weather and water around the planet, we it's no wonder that our climate is in the deep trouble that it is now. It's not just carbon dioxide. It's not just that we're putting so much carbon into the atmosphere from burning of fossil fuels. Sure, that is the major driver of global warming. But another part of it is that the Earth has lost its organs, its tissue, its strength, its ability to maintain a stable climate. And it's done that for, billions of years through forests. So if the tropical rainforest, like I said, is this belt around the equator, and we've lost half of it, where we still have a ton of it left is in some of the basically Africa and the Congo and the Amazon. The Amazon being the largest rainforest on the planet. And someone explained to me the Amazon is like just how massive it is. And if to just give you an idea how massive the Amazon rainforest is the size of the United States in terms of the forest. And if you think about the river, the Amazon River, which basically the Amazon basin covers about 9 countries in South America, not just Brazil, but also Colombia and Ecuador and Peru and Venezuela, Guyana, French Guiana, Suriname, Bolivia, I don't know if of course, I mentioned Ecuador, I think. So basically, the Amazon covers those 9 countries, but the Amazon River at its mouth flows as much water into the Atlantic Ocean as the next 6 largest rivers on Earth combined. So if you took the Amazon flow of the Amazon at the mouth of the Amazon, and then you took the flow of the next 6 largest rivers combined, you'd only just get the flow of the Amazon River. Now, that river at the mouth of the Amazon is just some of the water that's flowing through that system. A river 20% bigger than the Amazon River is lifted up every day by the trees into the sky. This is what they call the flying rivers or atmospheric rivers, sky rivers. People have been calling them different things, but basically the idea that every tree, when it evaporates and transpires water vapor, literally breathes out, it sweats out water vapor, about 1,000 liters per tree per day. That's in a tropical rainforest. That's a lot of water. 1,000 liters per tree per day for a mature tree. Now you combine the hundreds of billions of trees in the Amazon, and you get all of that moisture coming off the forest and then being picked up by the circulation system that moves weather around the world, and being basically circulated through the Amazon all the way to the tip of the continent in South America, but also some of those sky rivers that are lifted by the water vapor end up hitting the Andes and moving up north, even to North America, and around the world. And so literally when you watch the satellite imagery of clouds over a year over the Amazon, it does look like a heart. It looks like the clouds are just pulsating moisture. Moisture is basically being pumped through the trees through this evapotranspiration action. So if you think about that, that's happening all around the tropics, all around the world. Actually, it's happening everywhere. It's just more concentrated over the tropics. The Amazon River has, something like 20% of the world's fresh water pumping through its mouth and up into the sky and around the world. Now, that action depends on trees. And what we now know from what's called a tipping point, one of the things that is called a tipping point is when we lose about a quarter of the rainforest. When we lose 25% of the forest cover, that system of lifting up the moisture starts to weaken. And in some places, when it's a lot of deforestation, we've seen that system collapse. And that's why a rainforest can become a savanna over, maybe it takes hundreds of years, but the point at which it tips from being a rainforest to being a savanna is when we lose about 20 to 25% of the forest cover. And in the Amazon and in many parts of the world, we're reaching that threshold, or we've already passed it. And so what we came up with the group of scientists looking at the Amazon is that 80% of the Amazon needs to be either standing forest or reforested, because we've already lost something like 26% of the Amazon. So we need to get back to 80%. We need to protect the rest. But I'm just speaking about the Amazon, but you could take the same principles to the Congo and to Borneo and to islands in Melanesia. It would be similar. So basically we have to recognize that we are deeply connected in our biosphere to the vital organs of the planet, which are the rainforests, which are the coral reefs, which are all of the biologically productive systems of our planet. So that's why it's so important, the work we're all doing, that you're all doing. Now it's, most of the issues we all work on come from similar mindset, the mindset that sees, that maybe see the life blind economic system. We have an economic system. It's about money and it's about values, but that system of money and values doesn't distinguish between a parking lot or a rainforest. It's a system that's life blind, I would say. It cannot see life. It just sees money. And it also seeks to convert nature into money. So within that system, like Cynthia, you mentioned, we talk a lot about we can't just change that system without changing the goals of the system. In other words, if our economic system only sees money as the only value and doesn't see life, we need a system that sees life, that values life, a system that doesn't come from the same mindset that created the system that we have problems with, which is money rules. Money is everything. Money is the only value that counts. And so we have to reshape how we see the system, and to be life seeing, we have to find a way to align this idea of prosperity, which is living well and having the things we need in society for everyone in society, not just a few, living well and this prosperity and life flourishing. Those two goals need to be realigned in a way that is very idealistic. We can think about utopia, but ultimately that's our biggest riddle that we must solve in humanity is how do we align, this idea of prosperity, which we all seek, with life flourishing. And if we do that, then we start to think about principles of a regenerative economy. What does that exactly look like? Um, yeah, so in the work that we're doing in the Amazon, of course, we were at Amazon Watch, we've been fighting the fights for land rights, for indigenous collective rights, for nature's rights, and also for rights of future generations. We've been working with women and empowerment of women and elevating women's rights in the system that's mostly male dominated. We've also been working in, organizations now around 26 years old, working on key emblematic battles that target where the money comes from, going after the investors or going after the markets, who's consuming the beef or the oil or the gold, looking at things like what are the banks that are financing it. We've been following the money, and that's given us power to like fight back. And we've been winning many battles, actually. I think I'm very proud to say the organization has worked with indigenous peoples in the very important places where they're taking a stand, and has most of the time has prevailed. Many of those battles we won in the courts, or we've pushed the companies out, or we've gotten the banks to stop financing. But and I'm still very proud of that work, but I just felt like there was the other side of the work, which is what do we want? What do we stand for? What do we want to bring in? And not just what do we want to stop, but what do we want to allow to flourish, was the part that was calling me. So, back 6, 7 years ago, I started being part of a number of listening sessions and roundtables with indigenous peoples in this part of the Amazon that we had worked for many decades, and we had stopped many battles, but it just seemed like I call them zombies, these mega projects, these oil and mining projects and pipelines and industrial agriculture projects. You kill them, but they come back under the different name, under different financing. So we were doing that, one place at a time. We're fighting a battle here and a battle here and a battle here. And it just felt to me that we weren't going to solve the onslaught of continuous stream of things that were coming down, the pike in terms of plans for destructive development, one battle at a time. It just seemed like, thinking about this piece of wisdom that is attributed to Einstein, but I think it's as old as time. That if a problem is too difficult to solve, right there, zoom out, go bigger, look at what are the things that are causing the problem to begin with. And when we zoomed out, we for indigenous peoples, the acre that remained, the river from where it starts in the mountains all the way to the bottom of the lowlands, not just their part, because they could stop a project in their part, but if the dam was upstream or downstream, or oil project upstream, or a mine upstream. All those things were going to affect communities up and down. And so it didn't make sense anymore to say, of all these battles, which one's more important? They were all became important. So the people in this landscape, which represent 30 nations, sat around and said, what do we want for the future? Let's imagine 2030. What is it that we want to see in 2030? And we looked at all of the plans, the government's plans, and it was like by 2030, 80% of this area is going to be compromised with roads, with pipelines, with new drilling. And what's the alternative to that? So that's why we began to think as a bioregion, not just as an indigenous community, not just as a smaller area of an oil block, or a smaller outskirts of a town. The whole of the indigenous nations from both the Napo and the Pastasa, all these rivers, said, let's look at the whole bioregion. This is a watershed and a land between two watersheds. We need to look at the whole system. And if you were Gaia, if you were to put on the mind of Gaia, the Mother Earth, her boundaries would be river basins and watersheds. Those would be the natural boundaries, not necessarily the way things are now, which are maybe just by political districts or country boundaries. Those are constructs of the colonial period, most of them. So indigenous people started saying, this is our landscape. This is areas we have names for, we have relationship with. And so we mapped all those out, and some people were left out, and they asked if we could expand the boundaries to include more. And so the boundaries kept growing, and now the area that's 35 million hectares. It's the size of Italy, or I don't know what would be a good metaphor for Asia, but in a big area of rainforest, and something that indigenous people have a spiritual connection to, this idea that their mountains are alive, and they're considered elders. These peaks are called elders, and the rivers have spirit, and they have some of them are female, some of them are male, some of them are different kinds of spirit that people have a relationship to, that the land is alive, the forest is alive. This is one of the key concepts that we've seen, and you probably have seen around your own cultures and cosmology, that the earth is alive, but also the forest is alive, the river is alive. There are beings, and they have the right to exist and flourish. And so those are the things that began to shape the conversations around the table of these series of gatherings from 2015, 14, 15 until 2018. And so that led to the creation of this alliance. The alliance said, well, let's make a plan for what we do want to see. And they did a bioregional plan, and I'm happy to share the link if anyone's interested. But it's basically a plan that says, how do we make sure the culture and the ecological integrity of the ecosystem are flourishing in 7 generations? Or in this case, they said, by 2030, we've transitioned to this long-term model of seeing value to this area, which houses the largest collection of all life, and to do it in a way that doesn't impose on each of the 30 indigenous nations, or even within those nations, there's dozens and sometimes hundreds of communities that live within those nations. How do we do it without it being also a way, it's a way to align, it's a way to strengthen, but not a way to take away autonomy. So the way we thought about how we do both, how do you create alliance, unity, shared vision, but maintain autonomy? And I think that's one of the key pillars of indigenous peoples' collective rights, is the right to self-determination, right to self-government, right to decide their own future. So this idea came that, it's more like alliance among islands, the way an archipelago would be aligned in the oceans. We are each of the indigenous organizations and indigenous territories are independent and autonomous, but they're aligned around a shared vision. But they each define how their path forward shapes in their own territories, but they agree on certain principles. So this was the very interesting part of what took about 3.5 years to do. And eventually, the bioregional plan was we just put it out there. It's called preliminary version because everyone sees it as a living document. It's can't be too prescriptive. It's more of the guideposts, or you could say riverbanks that guide the flow of how each community or nation realizes this idea of a plan that puts the flourishing of life and culture and well-being of all life at the center of its DNA. And it's very much aligned with philosophies that you might have heard of called buen vivir, the idea of collective harmony, how we live in harmony in the community with its surrounding forest, and the forest with its surrounding bioregion, watershed, etc., all the way scaling all the way out to the global sphere. But this idea of when we came from indigenous way of seeing and knowing the world, and it's very much a philosophy that the Quechua people held, but they called it different things in different indigenous peoples in that landscape. All have a version of it. Some call it the good life, some call it well-being, some call it you know uh, their indigenous in their own indigenous languages, various forms of seeing the word harmony, or feeling the feeling of well-being collectively. um so we brought these conversations into putting in the paper. Let's see if we can define these principles. And of course, they're very much common to indigenous peoples, things like reciprocity, things like the living forest, things like equity, things like relationship to all life, and relationship among beings and among entities, um, being a good ancestor to future generations, allowing for what we don't know. Sometimes we just don't know. We commit to a process so we know we can know, but we don't come in knowing everything. So a lot of these things we discussed, and it's in the plan, and it's also the plan was, I would say, along the lines of what indigenous peoples call their life plans. Um, have folks here heard of or seen this idea of life plans? No. Well, I
No,
think
don't
it
think so.
started back I think, when a lot of indigenous people would get visitors. One week it would be the Minister of Education, the next week would be the Minister of Health, the next week would be the Department of Environment Ministry looking at conservation. Then they would come the Departments of Public Works saying what kind of public works. And I think that indigenous communities, it started in Colombia, started saying, look, we don't see the world in silos, these different plans, each one for a different purpose, separated from each other. We have what we call our life plan, which is an integrity, has this integrity, has this integral aspect that's very much about the interconnections of things. The education and health and transportation and livelihoods all go together. They're not separate camps. And we can't just have separate plans for conservation and for livelihoods. They've got to be connected. If we have a livelihood program, it has to be allowing our forests to thrive and our species to be healthy, not depleted. And it's got to go together. So they schooled us, the people from the outside, um, to say, we need to look at holistic plans. And so those life plans became an exercise, communities defining what's what's sacred? What's the most important thing to the community over time, over 7 generations? What's the thing they want to hold on to most? And usually it was things like, our forest is teeming with life, and our culture and language is very much alive. And so that became the sort of, they would say, the pillars, the foundations of what everything else tried to do. Or you could say the goal of what everything else tried to maintain. And so within that, in the communities have developed life plans, and some of them are very basic and some of them are very detailed, but they all have aspects around human well-being and, food systems, um, land rights, security, food security, but also, life teeming in the ecosystem, clean water, clean air, and programs for education and healthcare and basic needs. Some kind of aspiration around being regenerative, like, giving back, this concept of how the community internalizes the concept of reciprocity, which is you give the earth more than, as much or more than you receive. And so we had took a lot of these, collectively analyzed a lot of life plans and came up with a bioregional plan, which is sort of modeled after that holistic thing that puts well-being of all life at the center. So it's exciting. Now we spent a lot of the 3 or 4 years dreaming this plan, and then now that it's put on paper, the focus has moved to getting resources and support to the people on the ground to implement their plans and to pick 1 or 2 priorities initially to move those forward and share the lessons, and also to help build the capacity of everyone to be able to deliver on their life plans. So that's about it. I want to stop there and say, I know I've said a lot, but maybe we could have a conversation. You could tell me things you're curious about.
Thank you, Attosa. That was an epic. So 35 million hectares is 5 times the size of Sabah. So that's the headwaters area. Did you say 30 nations, 30 tribes?
Yes, it's there some, they consider themselves nations or nationalities, because, and of course some of them are massive, like the Shuar people or the Quichua are 100,000, 200,000 people, and have maybe in their territory might be the Quichua have like 200 communities in Ecuador and Peru, and so each community is its own little sovereign community, and then the Quichua nation as a whole sees itself as a nation or a nationality, nations within nations. So in these constitutions, they have what they call plurinational. The concept of being plurinational means, yes, there is an Ecuadorian or Peruvian state, the national government. Within it, there are many nations that predated the existence of these states, and so they also have unique nationalities or ethnicities. But in the constitution, actually, we're plurinational. Ecuador says we're a plurinational country, and each of these peoples is its own nationality within our nation state, which is very progressive. Colombia also does that. Not all the countries in South America do that.
You guys got that? What she meant? Biarpun dia orang ada cakaplah Malaysia, tetapi dia orang punya kaum, is that right? Dia pun panggil dia nation. So say Kadazan, folks will say it's a Kadazan nation. It's the Bajau nation, it's the Suluk nation, it's the etc. So they recognize that as a pluri nation within the nation of, say, Malaysia, for example. So that area yang nabilang 35 million hectares has 30 nations. Did you say how many countries, Attosa?
There are 9 countries in the Amazon basin, but within the sacred headwaters region, the bioregion as was defined, it's not the only headwaters to the Amazon, it's just one of the main headwaters to the Amazon. It's Ecuador and northern Peru.
Okay.
So we have 2 countries.
So your regional plan, which you say is a living document, which I love that because we also believe in living documents, is the idea, so you talked about raising resources for, the various groups to implement. Is there also a desire to take that towards policy or towards, law?
Exactly. There's a there's a category of ideas, a basket of ideas that is in the bioregional plan that's about ecological transition. So what are the conditions that enable a society to move away from a life blind system to a life seeing economic system, a regenerative, what we call a standing forest economy, for economy that sees the inherent links between a healthy forest and economic opportunity and activity. And so so we basically created something that has many pillars, but one of the key pillars, what we call the transition pathways, is exactly that. For example, it calls for leaving fossil fuels in the ground and declaring a moratorium on large-scale mining and large-scale infrastructure projects like dams and roads. And so that part, those are all, government actions that would be required through multi-stakeholder dialogues, which indigenous people have been pushing. For example, they organized nationally mostly peaceful, very peaceful demonstrations that shut down the country for over 2 weeks, all the roads and airports and ports. And that led to dialogues with the government. And the dialogues lasted for months. Well, first they lasted until they wouldn't stop the blockades until they had an initial agreement. And about 15 days later, the government made an agreement because they needed to move the country forward. They couldn't have all the roads shut down. And so after that, there was months and months of dialogue between the indigenous movement and the government. All the ministries had to send high-level ministers to these dialogues. And after months, there was a 10-point agreement. One of those was a 12-month moratorium on all new on all new oil drilling and a review of all the mining concessions. So those were really important short-term victories to buy time to figure out the long-term plan. So the moratorium is in the plan as one of the demands of the indigenous movement. There's also a call for debt relief. We know the linkage between, for example, Ecuador's external debt, the debt they owe the World Bank and the IMF and all these global banks, private and public banks and other countries. They owe this debt, and every month they have to pay interest on that debt. And to pay the interest on the debt, they are drilling for more oil and opening up more mines. And if you look at the amount of money they pay to the debt service, to just the interest on their debt, and the amount of money they earn from oil drilling and mining, it's about the same. And so it makes no sense, basically, to have all this burden from external debt payments. And I might add, the way these interest works is the interest is what keeps them trapped. They're paying just the interest. They never pay the principal of the loan, just the interest. And they can pay 10 times the amount they originally borrowed. And many of them still have long-term debt that they never got repaid, but they've paid every month for And so there's some ethics here. There's a problem of ethics that these countries have a lot of burden with their debt, and yet to pay the interest on the debt, they have to cut down their forest and drill for oil and mine just to keep the country from going bankrupt. Now, it's important to have solvent countries. We have to figure out how to deal with the debt, but we can also look at how debt relief can be an important way to incentivize the governments to commit to conservation, to commit to leaving oil in the ground. So that's one of the pillars of the plan too. And then lastly, I would say one of the things I'm excited about is how do we replace the GDP, which is the gross domestic product, with well-being indicators, happiness, well-being. And this is what Ken knows very well. We did, and we helped support this concept in places like Vanuatu. They're doing similar things in places like Costa Rica, trying to say, let's have a different goal of the system, not just economic growth or GDP growth, but let's have a goal that's about increased happiness, increased well-being of everyone. And so that's one of the other policy changes we're looking to promote, and many others, but those are some examples of what we call transition pathways that don't just have to do with better conditions in a territory, but have to do with how we change the system's goals and transform the economy.
Thank you. So anyone, any questions for Attosa while we have her? Maybe another, not sure how much time you have, Attosa.
I'm good.
You're
Sure.
good? Okay. Ken has a question. Anyone else?
Hi, Attosa. While everyone is mulling over their questions, let me throw one to you. So how do you build a politics that will support that kind of transition?
Very good question.
We know everywhere in the world that most people want this, but as soon as you try to organize anything politically to this, you just seem to be destroyed in a moment. So how you build the political support for something like this?
Very good question. Every place is different, obviously, but it's about citizens' power. It's about the power through communication and the narrative of public opinion. And it's about pressure, international support and solidarity, and how that plays a role. I would say these are some of the conditions. You know, if the government is imposing a project that is against the people and their rights, we have international tribunals to say so, that it's a violation of the rights. We have international organizations that then can take that violation, evidence of violation, to investors and force them to divest. They have financial power. Financial power can translate to political power. We also have the media power, the power of the narrative and opinion. And sometimes it's hard to have good press coverage in a local fight when the politics are against us. That's why it's sometimes even more important to get a story in an international paper or an international, channel through even social media. But, you know, the idea that we can have power through the media. One story in the New York Times can really shape make a difference in the outcome of a battle on the someplace far away. So those are, I would say, media, financial, and then international legal. And then it comes back to the how do you exercise that at the local level? It's very difficult, but one of the ways that people are doing that is at the very local level, like working in parts of the Amazon. We are now dealing with more politicians who are indigenous. And, you know, of course, there needs to be leadership training before these people run for office, before they are, before indigenous people's own candidates and local environmental groups' own candidates rise to play in the political game. There needs to be everything from, kind of deep grounding of those candidates around ecological health, around indigenous rights, around collective rights, around economic critique of the economic system. and they need to be trained on ethics and on issues of self-governance. And those things will really help go a long way. Not to say those candidates have huge chances, but we are seeing more and more women, more and more indigenous candidates taking office locally. And then one of the things I'm really, I don't think there's one solution for everywhere, but one of the things I'm excited about is what's happening right now under the process of referendum. Now, they can be sanctioned in government. There can also be informal referendums. Right now are happening in Ecuador, where people are going to decide whether or not mining will be allowed in an area of Quito Metropolitan District, which is so huge. It takes like 4 or 5 hours to drive across it, and it's got some of the last remnants of a type of montane cloud forest. And there's a bunch of mega mines planned for this forest area. And the Quito metropolitan area, which is most of the city of Quito, with young people who are very pro conservation, pro human rights, mostly are, majority of the population is under 35. So they come from this mindset of we need to do something about the climate and the rainforest. And so they are voting. They first got enough signatures to put it on the ballot. There's going to be a special election in July where everybody who lives in the city of Quito gets to vote on whether or not there should be mining in the rainforest around Quito, which affects Quito's water supply. So I think it's a very exciting time. Something like that is binding. If the people vote yes, and of course that's up to a lot of work that needs to happen on the ground, then you could potentially see a ban on mining in a whole part of the country. It's not enough, it's not nationwide, but it's an example of referendums. And referendums are both formal and informal. So it's something that can help. But ultimately, the more visibility, the more political power.
Thank you. Anyone?
So
You were gonna say something, Attosa?
oh, just that we need good Ken's point. We need basically to really be mindful of putting more good candidates out there. We need to elect the right candidates to begin with, which is so hard in many places where democracy isn't much of a foothold.
Anyone? Another comment, question?
Hi, Attosa.
Hi.
Hi. I'm just wondering if with the communities you work with, have you had any experience working with communities who struggle with paper identity? Because in the room with us are folks that have witnessed kind of like the violence of not having documents. So they're not living within the kind of like spheres of influence, like they can't vote, they can't participate in economic processes and things like that. And I'm just wondering, like, if you've any experience with that.
Thank you for that question. Yeah, I mean, many communities in the Amazon have this issue around there's not good data about who lives in their territories, how many people. Often their numbers are underestimated. And they're from old census data, or there isn't people who can get out to the outskirts of the communities to even be counted. So there's underrepresentation in terms of numbers. So population numbers are always lower than in paper are lower than in real life. But also the land title is a key issue, and in many countries the idea that how land registries happen, or if they exist even, or where the title comes from, who's the title belong to. So, and then even when they have title, there can be irregularities in those titles, so they're not exactly official, or they're not exactly the standard that the government can basically say, oh, this isn't the standard title, therefore it's not valid. So there's those battles, and I think that the ideal scenario that Indigenous peoples have done is they trained legal lawyers, but before lawyers, they even trained their community members as paralegals, so that there are people in each village that had some understanding of Indigenous peoples' collective rights and land rights, and knew something about their own community's land titles, and then could also be an advocate for the community in legal matters, even though they were not lawyers. So there was like a popular program of creating, they're called paralegals, basically people who community designated, usually 2 people per community, to kind of get an advanced education on their legal rights, land tenure issues, and anything that was threatening the community's land rights, including things like documentation, which obviously is difficult for a lot of communities. But yeah, so I would say organizing internally and regionally is a key thing.
Did I answer your question? Yeah. Any others? Ada apa-apa soalan, komen?
Yeah, maybe someone wants to share a real problem that they're facing with solutions that they're looking to advance strategy.
Anyone? I think everyone's sort of deep in thought about what you shared, trying to imagine how to get there.
Well, one thing I wanted to share is this thing we're starting called the Living Amazon School, and maybe we could do an exchange with this program at some point. What the Living Amazon School, one of the issues in the Amazon and the many of the Sacred Headwaters communities is that they get usually very bad education in the communities. That is, for example, they'll have one teacher for K through 6th grade, and then no more after 6th grade, no opportunities for after 6th grade. And then the kids have to go into cities or local towns or local schools and be in boarding schools far away from their home, far away from their village language, their culture, their forest. And that causes a lot of erosion of Indigenous people's own identities, and also it doesn't create a success path for them because they can't relate to that culture, or they're completely subsumed by it. So I'm sure that, I don't know if that resonates with what you all deal with. If that also, so one of the things Indigenous people want is to have high schools nearest to their territories, and also they would like to have what they call relevant formation schools. So, of course, the traditional school may not give the kind of education an Indigenous person needs to be a good steward or governor of their territory. Eventually, these are communities that have millions of acres. They have to make sure they're protected and aren't being encroached on, that their rights are being guaranteed. So skills, you would need to be good Indigenous governor of your territory. And so we are developing a school that started on March 9th, and it has a curriculum that has a whole component of bringing Indigenous and traditional wisdom and knowledge systems. So elders, people who are really good at everything from ecological knowledge to health to governance, wise, kind of the wisdom keepers of the communities having a role in the education. And then there's also, you know, more of the modern education, like everything practical, like how do you design a program? How do you use drones to monitor your forest and satellite imagery to track deforestation, etc. And also programs around communication and basic rights. So I'm sure we have something to learn from your curriculum, but we are really excited that the school opened with around 40 students who were each nominated by their communities. And, you know, they're going to go through a 1-year program, and then they're going to take the teachings back to their communities and teach those teachings to the people that are in their villages. And so that's, we start with a small number, but we're hoping that school grows. It's in the film, it's in the video you watched. It's called like Forest Wisdom University, but you know, in reality, it's called the Living Amazon School, which is the name they chose for it. And we're very excited about it. And it's going to target people post high school, like high school until early 30s.
Macam minat. Ada orang mau pergi, travel pergi Amazon. Buat exchange. Huh? Huh? we thinking it might be fun for folks here to go over there and experience what a living Amazon school is like.
And bring some of your skills and curriculums to us too. I think you probably have a longer experience there. This school is an experiment, and the first year is just, you know, to see what works. But you all probably know what works because you've been doing it.
Well, the folks here that are building alternative schools, they call them, most of them, I think, are for, you know, what we term stateless children. And they oftentimes, or I think most times, sea dwelling people or coastal dwelling people. So that'd be interesting to see what an exchange between forest dwelling folks and sea dwelling folks. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be interesting. Yeah, and to also think about one of the other things to answer an earlier question was, in one of the indigenous nations I work with, they did their own census. In fact, they did their own census as part of their land rights, and they, you know, created their own registry of their residents, and then they used that to do a referendum that was just for them, no one else. You know, it was not like an officially sanctioned election, but it was a self-governance, active self-governance, autonomous territorial governance, which was this idea of doing, you know, a registry of your people, and then once that's been presented to the government and there was a period of no objection, then that became the roster of which a referendum was held and votes were recorded around whether or not the community wanted oil drilling. And the government had already approved an oil drilling project on their land, but the community was opposed. So they used the referendum as a tool to exercise their self-governance, which is very interesting. You know, they submitted that to the international courts to say, look, here's our ancestral territory, even though our government doesn't recognize it. Here's our census of who we are and our history. Here's our historical documents. And here's our referendum, our position. We've passed every assembly, we've passed declarations against oil companies and oil drilling, but here is actually a vote we held, and we had observers, we had international observers, we had groups like Oxfam and CARE, that came and became election observers, and we held our own referendum, and here's the result. And so what they're building is they're building their case for their rights under the UN Declaration of Indigenous Peoples, as well as the UN ILO Convention 169, which are two main bodies of international law that we look at when we look at Indigenous people's rights. And they were able to show under both of those that their rights are being violated and they have ancestral rights to this territory. Now, they're filing court cases in Peru in this case. They may not win those initially. They may lose those. Most likely they will lose those because the government hasn't yet adopted the concept of indigenous territories. But they will, once they are going to win at the international tribunals, then there's effort to change the laws in these countries. So it's just a slow process, but I would say it's worth every step a little closer to our aspiration of collective rights. And also rights of nature. You know, rights of nature is started with just small cities passing resolutions at their city councils, saying their watershed or their river or their stream had rights because it was being threatened by a dam or a mine. And then they gave them personhood. And this movement has grown, and now there's rights of nature laws in more than 50 countries. And some countries like Ecuador actually have it in the constitution. And it basically is something that I think is very important in the future. Just like in the past, we said, you know, there was, you know, okay, it was okay. Women didn't have a right to vote, or indigenous people didn't have the rights. And then we moved. We said, oh, you know, religious freedom, you know, that's a right, and women's right to vote, and indigenous people's land rights. We're now saying nature has rights, ecosystems have rights, and they should be subjects of law, not objects of law. The idea that most of our laws are based on the fact that nature is a natural resource and is basically object, not a living thing, not a living entity, but an object. And that object can, if you destroy an object, you're just fined for, you know, paying a fine. You might be paid a fine, but you're not held. If you kill an ecosystem with poison, you're not held criminally, like you killed something, like you killed another being, or you killed a human. But that's where the law is moving to eventually, to say, you know, nature has rights, and if you destroy nature, you are liable for restoring nature. And then if you went all the way to the idea of ecocide, which is looking at destruction of nature as a crime, then you could see that someone who destroys an ecosystem could be held in, you know, as a criminal, not just pay a fine, but to be held as a criminal, to be charged and tried as a criminal. And so I think that's where the law is moving eventually. But for now, the tool is you look at adopting local policies around the rights of rivers, rights of watersheds. You look at things like giving personhood to mountains and watersheds and islands and rivers, you know, and then that entity becomes a subject, and like any other person, to go to court and have their day in court. One of those cases just happened in Ecuador, where a frog that was going extinct and was very, very small and very only in this one area was went to court, and people on behalf of the frog and went to court, they had their day in court. The frog had his day in court, and the frog won. The judge ruled with the frog, and the mine was stopped. And so there are a number of those cases now, and we aren't waiting for those. We're actually in Ecuador, we're training judges and law students and law professors about rights of nature, because if they don't know about it, then they may not know how to enforce it, but once they know about it, it's like once they see it, they can't not see it. Once you see the rights of nature as a lawyer or a law student or a judge or anyone, really, any of us, once we see rights of nature, we cannot not see it. And that's why it's such a powerful idea.
I'm imagining what it would be like, Leton and Enro, if the elephants took the Pan Borneo Highway Company to court. Can you imagine?
Well, here's another idea. For a long time, the rights of nature, we were not getting our day in court. We were not getting many cases, and we were training people, and we were losing lots of cases. So we decided there needed to be a citizens tribunal. So now there's something called the Citizens Tribunal on the Rights of Nature. And all it means is that any group anywhere in the world, we have some guides you can download and figure out, but anywhere in the world can hold their own citizens court, a citizens trial. So it's a mock trial, obviously it doesn't have the power of a government decision, but it's an exercise where citizens present cases. There's a special earth prosecutor who reviews the cases. There's a trial. We hold a trial where we actually have judges. I'm one of the judges. Vandana Shiva is a judge, and many other people have been judges. And we hear those cases and we write decisions and we issue verdicts as a citizens tribunal to show the world that this is, this is beginning to be a customary practice. Also, they're really wonderful. Like it's like a way to do a conference without doing a conference, where you can bring issues that you care about, whether it's elephants or mines or pollution or deforestation. You can even human rights violations, because that's also ultimately humans are part of nature. So if defenders of nature are being harmed, then that's a rights of nature court case as well. Maybe get a law school locally to basically organize it.
That would be amazing.
There's a website called Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature. You can go there to find out more.
Okay, you got that? Well, Attosa, I think we will have to let you go with your day. That was, I found, very inspiring. That's the leaps you made. So we can imagine what it could be like here in our contexts.
Thank you so much, Cynthia, and all the students, all the leaders. You are the hope for the future. And next time I want to come there and sit with you all sometime soon.
Well, you're welcome anytime, Attosa. All right.
Thank you.
So everyone, let's give some love to Attosa. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Have a beautiful rest of your time. Thank you. Have a beautiful day. Bye.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Have some wine for us.